What would you do if a 13-year-old stood in front of Judge Caprio accused of taking a car, causing a street collision, lying to police, and then saying one sentence so honest it made an entire courtroom forget how to breathe? Drop a comment telling us whether age should matter when someone breaks the law, because this story will test everything you think you know about justice. By the time this hearing was over, one boy's life had split into two parts: the child he had been before he opened his mouth, and the person he became after the truth finally came out. Hit that subscribe button if you believe the courtroom is where character gets exposed, because what happened here was bigger than a ticket, bigger than a legal lecture, and bigger than one scared kid in oversized sneakers. At exactly 9:07 on a wet Wednesday morning in Providence, the gallery expected another quick case. Another excuse, another apology that sounded practiced, another young face trying to dodge consequences. Like this video if you believe first impressions can be dangerously wrong, because the boy walking into that room looked like the last person anyone wanted to feel sorry for. He had on a charcoal gray Nike Tech fleece zipped all the way to his throat, black Jordan 1s with the left toe scraped white, and a stubborn expression that made him seem older than 13 and younger than innocent. Share this with someone who needs to see how fast judgment can turn into humility, because Judge Caprio was about to hear a case that would stay with everyone in that courtroom long after the gavel came down. The clerk called the matter in a voice so ordinary nobody yet understood they were about to witness the kind of moment millions would later talk about as if they had been there themselves. Case number TM 26-1147, City of Providence versus Mateo Cruz. Charges include operating a motor vehicle without a license, leaving the scene of property damage, and failure to yield at the intersection of Atwells Avenue and Sutton Street on November 18, 2025, at 7:14 a.m. The room shifted. Not because the charges were shocking by themselves. Judge Caprio had heard worse. Everybody knew that. But because Mateo Cruz was 13 years old, 5'2" on a good day, with a face that was still round in the cheeks and hands that looked too small to hold a steering wheel, let alone the weight of what he had done. His mother stood beside him, Elena Cruz, 34, overnight nursing assistant at St. Mary's Rehabilitation Center, burgundy Cherokee scrubs under a black puffer coat, hair pinned up too fast, eyes swollen from either crying or double shifts or both. She looked like a woman who had not slept in peace for months. Behind them sat a thin little girl in a yellow cardigan with an inhaler clipped to her backpack. Sophia Cruz, 8 years old, Mateo's sister. Her dark curls were tied with a blue ribbon that had started to come loose. Every few seconds she pressed her knees together and looked at the floor like even breathing too loud might get her in trouble. And 3 rows back near the aisle sat the people everyone assumed were there because of what Mateo had done. Lorraine Bianchi, 67, owner of Bianchi Blooms, wearing a beige wool coat and a brace on her right wrist. Anthony DeLuca, 39, driver for Federal Hill Bakery, broad shoulders squeezed into a navy delivery jacket. Officer Daniel Mercer, Providence Police, clean haircut, body cam clipped to his chest even off duty out of habit. There was also a school counselor in a forest green sweater with a folder in her lap, Priya Patel, and nobody, yet knew why she had taken off work to be there. Judge Caprio adjusted his glasses and studied Mateo in the way only a veteran judge could do, not just looking at the face but at the silence around it. "How old are you, young man?" "13." The gallery murmured, a low wave, a rustle of coats, a cough cut off halfway. One woman near the back whispered 13, as if the number itself was a crime. 13, Caprio repeated, slower this time. "And were you operating a 2006 blue Toyota Camry on November 18? Mateo shrugged. "That's what they say." It was a small answer, but it hit the room like a slap. Because there it was, the attitude, the armor, the thing that makes mercy harder. His mother closed her eyes for half a second like she wanted to step out of her own body. Officer Mercer leaned back in his seat. Anthony DeLuca folded his arms. Lorraine Bianchi looked down, disappointed before the story had even begun. Judge Caprio didn't raise his voice. He almost never needed to. "We're not starting there," he said. "This is a courtroom, not a hallway. You can be upset. You can be scared, but you will not be careless with the truth." Mateo's jaw tightened. He looked straight ahead. Caprio turned to Alina. "Ma'am, is that your vehicle?" "Yes, Your Honor, it is, or was." Her voice cracked on the last word. "It's my car." "And your son took I.T. without permission?" She swallowed hard. "Yes." No dramatic music played. No one moved, but the emotional temperature in that room dropped 3 degrees, because now the picture forming was ugly and familiar. A rebellious kid, a struggling mother, somebody else paying the price. The prosecutor, a neat young city attorney named Rebecca Klein, stood and summarized the incident. At 7:14 a.m. on Tuesday, November 18, a blue Toyota Camry driven by Mateo Cruz rolled through a stop sign near Sutton Street, clipped the rear panel of a Federal Hill Bakery delivery van, jumped the curb, knocked over a flower display belonging to Lorraine Bianchi, and drove off before officers arrived. Damages totaled $4,860 to the van, $1,275 to the floral inventory and display cart, and several potted ceramic planters were destroyed. Mrs. Bianchi fell during the impact and suffered a wrist sprain and deep bruising to her left hip. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses and a city traffic camera identified the vehicle. Officer Mercer later located the car parked outside the Cruz apartment on Messer Street with fresh paint transfer and a cracked headlight. It sounded bad, worse than bad. It sounded selfish. And then Klein added the part that made the audience turn on him almost instantly. When Officer Mercer asked the minor whether he had been operating the vehicle, the minor denied involvement and stated, quote, "Prove it." You could hear the whisper spread this time. "Prove it." A 13-year-old to a police officer, after injuring an elderly woman and smashing a working man's van. In that instant, the room decided who Mateo Cruz was. Judge Caprio looked at the boy. "Did you say that?" Mateo said nothing. "Did you say that?" A longer silence. Then with the same defiant shrug, Mateo answered, "Yeah." That was the outrage moment. You could feel it rise. Even Sophia turned and looked at her brother as if she didn't recognize him. Alina covered her mouth. The clerk stopped typing for a fraction of a second. This was the moment most people would stop feeling curiosity and start demanding punishment. And if you've ever seen a kid build a wall so high he traps himself behind it, hit subscribe right now, because the next few minutes showed exactly how pride can make mercy look impossible. Judge Caprio folded his hands. "Young man, arrogance is a terrible lawyer." A few people in the gallery nodded. Somebody quietly said, "That's right." Caprio went on, "Especially when the evidence is already here." Rebecca Klein moved to the evidence monitor and played the first clip, grainy surveillance from Salerno's corner market. Timestamp 7:14:22 a.m. Rain spit on the lens. The blue Camry entered frame too fast. The bakery van braked. There was a sharp jerk, a metallic smack, a shower of carnations and wet cardboard. Mrs. Bianchi stumbled backward and disappeared from view behind the flower rack as ceramic pots shattered on the sidewalk. Then the Camry paused for 1 second, maybe 2, and drove away. Gasps, real ones, not theatrical. Lorraine Bianchi looked down at her brace. Anthony DeLuca shook his head once like he had hoped the footage would somehow be less ugly than memory. The prosecutor froze the frame on the car's dented front quarter panel and the plate partially visible through rain. "Same vehicle registered to Alina Cruz," she said. Then came Officer Mercer's body cam. The audio started with footsteps on wet pavement, a car door slamming and Mercer's voice asking Mateo his name. On the footage, Mateo stood outside the Camry in the apartment lot, hood up, hands buried in the pockets of that same gray Nike fleece. Alina was in the doorway behind him, still in scrubs, confusion turning to horror as she saw the damage. Mercer asked if Mateo had been driving. Mateo looked straight at the officer and said, "Prove it." The silence after the clip ended was heavier than noise. Judge Caprio let it sit there. He knew what silence does. It makes people listen to themselves. Finally, he asked, "Mateo, do you understand why everyone in this room is upset with you?" "Because they think I'm a bad kid." Caprio's eyes narrowed, not in anger but precision. "No, because a woman got hurt. A man's work vehicle was damaged. Your mother could have lost what little she has. And then you chose disrespect when truth was the only thing that might have helped you." That one landed. Mateo blinked just once, but the wall was still up. The prosecutor asked for accountability, strong accountability. Community sanctions, restitution, mandatory counseling, juvenile referral review. She wasn't cruel about it. She was measured, almost colder for being so measured. "The city recognizes his age," she said, "but age cannot be used as a shield while adults absorb the cost of his choices." Anthony DeLuca gave a brief statement. He said he was on his usual route from Federal Hill Bakery, delivering morning bread to 3 cafes before 8:00 a.m. The van was out of service. For 9 days, he lost overtime. He had to borrow his brother-in-law's Ford Transit and work evenings to make up the route. "I got kids too," he said. "You can't just hit people and leave. Doesn't matter if you're 13 or 30. Then Lorraine Bianchi stood. She was smaller than people expected, delicate almost, white hair pinned neatly, pearl earrings, the kind of woman who still says thank you to cashiers and writes Christmas cards by hand, but her voice carried. "I have run that flower stand for 21 years, she said. "My husband started it before he died. Those flowers were for a church memorial that afternoon. I fell trying to catch the cart. My wrist still wakes me up at night. But more than the pain, what I remember is watching that car stop and then leave. That feeling, Judge, being looked at, and left. If you believe leaving the scene says more about a person than the crash itself, like this video. Because at that moment, nobody in the room thought this case had a chance of becoming anything except a lesson in consequences." Mateo stared at the defense table, not at Lorraine, not at his mother, not at the judge, just at the scar on his own sneaker. Caprio asked quietly, "Do you have anything to say to Mrs. Bianchi?" Mateo lifted his head halfway. "I didn't mean to hit her." "Did you hit her?" "She was behind the flowers." A few people exhaled sharply. Not the answer. Absolutely not the answer. Judge Caprio leaned back. "Young man, every wrong thing you say digs the hole deeper." Then, just when it seemed Mateo was about to keep sinking, Priya Patel rose from the gallery and asked if the court would allow a letter she had brought from Mateo's school. The prosecutor looked surprised. Alina looked terrified. Mateo's shoulders stiffened so suddenly it was obvious he had no idea the counselor had come. Caprio accepted the letter, adjusted his glasses again, and began to read. Halfway through, his expression changed. Not softened, not exactly, but sharpened in a different direction. He looked up at Mateo. "Ms. Patel says you have missed 15 mornings of first period this semester because you're responsible for getting your sister ready for school. She says you haven't had a late homework assignment in 11 weeks. She says you carry an inhaler in your backpack that doesn't belong to you. Why?" Mateo didn't answer. Caprio asked again, "Why would your school counselor write that?" Mateo's lips pressed into a hard line. And that was when everybody realized the case they thought they understood had just cracked open. Because hidden inside that folder was a version of this boy nobody in the room had seen yet. The judge read another sentence. Then another. Ms. Patel described Mateo as guarded, quick-tempered, highly defensive with authority, but fiercely protective of his younger sister Sophia, who had severe asthma and 3 emergency room visits in the past year. She said Mateo often arrived to school tired because his mother worked overnight and slept in short blocks. She said he had a pattern of getting into arguments not when he was challenged, but when he felt cornered. Then came the line that changed the energy entirely. On the morning of November 18, Mateo arrived at school with blood on the cuff of his sleeve and asked if the nurse had extra nebulizer masks. The gallery stopped breathing again. Caprio looked from the paper to Mateo. What happened that morning? I already told them. No, said Caprio, you told them almost nothing. Rebecca Klein objected gently that motive did not erase the violations. The judge agreed. It does not erase them, but it may explain them. An explanation matters when deciding what justice should look like. Alina began to cry without sound, tears slipping down both cheeks while she stared at her own hands. Sophia looked between her mother and brother with a confusion that only children know, the confusion of sensing a truth adults have been trying to hide from you. Caprio turned to Alina. Ma'am, why didn't I hear any of this from you? She could barely get the words out. Because I was ashamed, Your Honor. The room got quieter. Ashamed of what? That my son had to be the one holding things together when I couldn't. Those words did something the evidence could not. They shifted the lens. Not enough to excuse, not enough to erase what happened on Sutton Street, but enough to make people hesitate before condemning him in a single sentence. And still something was wrong, because if this was all about helping Sophia, why lie? Why the attitude? Why the prove it? Why stop and then drive away? The compassion angle made sense. The cruelty angle made sense, but both at once. That was harder, that was human, and that is what made the room lean forward. Judge Caprio asked for the whole story. Alina tried. She said she had gotten home from an overnight shift around 6:10 a.m. exhausted. Sophia had woken up wheezing. The home nebulizer machine was broken, something. NG with the tubing and compressor. Alina had a spare prescription pickup waiting at the Walgreens on Broad Street, but her phone had died during the shift, and the Camry had almost no gas. She said she remembers sitting down on the couch just for a minute, intending to rest her eyes before calling her sister for help. When I woke up, she whispered, the car was gone. Mateo still wouldn't look at her. So you took the vehicle, Caprio said. Mateo muttered, yeah. To get medication. A nod. Why not call 911? No answer. Why not ask a neighbor? Still nothing. Caprio's tone stayed calm. You are 13. Every legal adult option was better than putting your hands on a steering wheel. Mateo snapped then, not loudly but with enough heat to shake the room. Because legal adult options take time. There it was, the first crack, raw, unguarded, real. Caprio did not pounce. And how much time did you think your sister had? Mateo swallowed. I didn't know. For the first time since the hearing began, his voice sounded like a child's. He explained in fragments. Sophia had been coughing hard around 6:45. Her lips didn't turn blue, but they had the pale color he had learned to fear. Alina was dead asleep. The nebulizer machine made a grinding noise and stopped. Their upstairs neighbor, Mr. Velez, was already gone for his bus route. Mateo tried plugging the machine into another outlet. Nothing. He knew there was medication at the pharmacy because he had heard his mother mention it the night before. He knew where she kept the keys because she kept them in the chipped ceramic bowl by the microwave. So you took the keys, the judge said. Mateo nodded again. And then what? I drove. The simplicity of it made it worse. He said the first few blocks were fine. Empty streets, drizzle, school buses not yet everywhere. He had driven only once before in a parking lot with his father years ago. He said he thought he could do it. Thought he only had to make it there and back. Thought panic could be controlled if he kept moving. Then he reached Atwell's and Sutton. Anthony DeLuca's van came through the intersection. Mateo panicked at the stop sign, hit the brake too late, then the gas instead of the brake for half a second. The Camry clipped the van, bounced the curb, and slammed into the flower cart. He heard pots crack and somebody yell. He said he stopped. He saw Mrs. Bianchi fall. He saw people running toward them. And then, Caprio asked. Mateo's throat moved. I left. Why? The boy's eyes finally lifted. They were wet now, but angry wet, not surrendered wet. Because all I could think about was Sophia. A murmur again, softer this time, less judgment, more conflict. Rebecca Klein stepped forward. Your Honor, even if the court accepts his urgency, he still chose to leave an injured person behind. Mateo shot back before anyone could stop him. She wasn't bleeding. Lorraine Bianchi stiffened. Alina whispered, Mateo. Judge Caprio raised a hand. Not loud, just enough. Stop. Do you hear yourself? Mercy becomes harder every time you make someone's pain sound smaller so yours can sound bigger. That line hung in the room. It was the kind of line people would repeat later because it cut straight through the noise. Mateo looked down again. His ears had turned red. Then Officer Mercer surprised everyone. He asked permission to clarify something from the body cam timeline. The judge allowed it. Mercer said when he arrived at the Cruz apartment around 8:02 a.m., Sophia was not in visible respiratory distress. She was asleep on the couch with a humidifier beside her. Alina had apparently retrieved a rescue inhaler from a neighbor. That's why, Mercer said. I didn't fully buy the urgency story at the time. The prosecutor nodded. It seemed to undercut Mateo all over again. But then Mercer added, however, I also reviewed dispatch logs after the fact. There was a 6:58 a.m. non-completed 911 call from the Cruz residence. 7 seconds. Open line. Coughing heard. No verbal response before disconnect. The courtroom shifted again. Another turn, another piece sliding into place. Caprio looked at Mateo. Did you call 911? Mateo nodded barely. And hang up. I thought if they came, my mom would get blamed. Now even the prosecutor paused. For the first time, the story felt less like a rebellious stunt and more like a disaster built from fear, poverty, exhaustion, and one terrible decision. Not innocence, never innocence, but something far more complicated than attitude. Drop a comment telling us if fear has ever made you do the exact wrong thing for what felt like the right reason. Because this is where the case stopped being easy and started being unforgettable. Caprio asked Alina whether there had been previous child services involvement. She hesitated so long the answer was obvious before she spoke. After my husband passed, she said, a school absence issue, nothing active now. That explained another layer. Mateo had not. Just feared getting caught. He had feared losing his family. And then came the revelation that changed everything. Judge Caprio asked about Mateo's father. Alina looked at the floor. Ms. Patel looked at Mateo. The boy's whole posture changed, every muscle telling the room to stay away from that subject. But Caprio had seen enough families implode around unspoken grief to know when silence itself was evidence. What happened to your father? He asked gently. Mateo answered before his mother could. He died in the back of an ambulance on I-95 because traffic was backed up and nobody moved. The room froze. No one had expected that. His father, Javier Cruz, had suffered a sudden cardiac event 18 months earlier while riding home from a construction job with a coworker. Rush hour gridlock near the Broadway exit, delayed response, delayed transport. Mateo had heard adults say over and over that if help had come faster, maybe things would be different. Rational or not, that sentence had rooted inside him. Help takes time. Time kills people. If someone you love can't breathe, you move first and explain later. Suddenly, the worst thing he had done made emotional sense in the worst possible way. Not justified, never that, but understandable. Caprio sat back. Rebecca Klein stopped writing. Even Anthony DeLuca's expression softened a fraction. Lorraine Bianchi looked at Matteo with something that was no longer anger alone. Judge Caprio said, "That kind of loss can bend a child's thinking." Matteo gave a hollow laugh. "Everybody says that when they don't know what to do with you." That was another quotable line. Bitter, too old for 13. The kind of sentence people hear from wounded kids right before the truth breaks loose. Caprio answered, "No. People say that when they want to excuse you. I'm not excusing you. I'm trying to understand whether there's a person under all this armor who can still be reached." For the first time, Matteo looked like someone had hit him harder with kindness than punishment ever could. The judge then did something veteran storytellers understand instantly. He slowed everything down. He asked the clerk to bring up the timeline minute by minute. 6:58 a.m. incomplete 911 call. 7:05 Matteo leaves apartment. 7:14 collision. 7:18 pharmacy camera shows a hooded figure entering Walgreens. 7:26 same figure exiting with prescription bag. 7:33 vehicle returns to Messer Street. 8:02 Officer Mercer arrival. "Was that you at the pharmacy?" Caprio asked. "Yes." "And did you pick up the medication?" "Yes." "For whom?" Matteo pointed without looking. "Sophia." Sophia's small hand tightened around her backpack strap. The prosecutor then introduced the pharmacy receipt. It was real. Prescription for albuterol neb solution, paid in cash, $11.82. The timestamp matched. So did the store clerk's statement. Matteo had come in drenched, shaking, asking if they could go faster. Everything was changing, but not everything. Because then Rebecca Klein introduced something else. A witness statement from Walgreens employee Marla Singh. According to her, Matteo had a cut on his hand and what looked like wet dirt or potting soil on his sleeve. When she asked if he was okay, he said, "I hit something but I can't stay." Not someone, something. Again the room tightened. Lorraine Bianchi's mouth trembled. Anthony DeLuca stared forward. Judge Caprio looked at Matteo with renewed seriousness. "You knew." Matteo's voice dropped to almost nothing. "I knew." "So when you later told Officer Mercer prove it, that wasn't fear alone?" No answer. "That was concealment." Still nothing. Caprio nodded once. The hard truth was back in the room. Compassion had entered, but so had accountability. The story was becoming more morally sophisticated by the minute, exactly the kind of case that keeps people glued to the screen because no emotion gets to stay simple for long. If you're still with this story, like the video now, because the next witness was about to reveal what Matteo had looked like before the crash, and it would change how the whole room understood his attitude. Priya Patel took the stand. She wasn't dramatic, no tears, no speechifying. That made her more believable. She testified that Matteo had been one of the most defensive students she had ever worked with, but also one of the most hypervigilant. He scanned rooms, sat facing doors, reacted to raised voices before words were even spoken. He got into trouble mostly when adults mistook his tone for disrespect before asking what had happened. "Was he a model student?" the prosecutor asked. "No." "Does he lie?" "Yes, when he thinks truth will cost him something he cannot afford to lose." That was devastating because it was so precise. "And what do you believe he feared losing here?" Patel looked directly at Matteo before answering. His mother, his home, his sister's safety, and the last piece of dignity he thought he still controlled. Then she did so. Anything unexpected. She opened a folder and produced a page torn from a spiral notebook. "This was written in my office 3 weeks before the incident. He said it was for English, but he never turned it in." The judge read silently for a moment, then aloud. "When adults say be patient, kids hear wait. When adults say calm down, kids hear stop caring. When adults say help is coming, kids remember the times it didn't. No one moved. The room had gone from outrage to shock to discomfort to empathy, and now it was entering dangerous territory, recognition. Because everybody in there, if they were honest, knew some version of that sentence. Maybe from childhood, maybe from a parent, maybe from their own panic. Caprio folded the page. "Matteo, did you write this?" "Yes." "Then you know how to tell the truth. You just don't know how to stay in it when it hurts." Matteo's face crumpled for half a second before he forced it still again. The prosecutor reminded the court that insight did not repair damage. She was right. Lorraine Bianchi still had pain. Anthony DeLuca still lost income. Elena still had a son who took her car. Sophia still lived in a house where a 13-year-old thought he had to become an adult before breakfast. All of it could be true at once. Judge Caprio asked for a brief recess so he could review the written materials. The courtroom buzzed the moment he stepped back. Quiet buzz, but electric. People whispered theories. Some thought Matteo was manipulating everyone. Others thought the system had failed him long before he failed it. And right there, in the middle of that uncertainty, a bailiff named Sal approached the bench clerk holding a small, clear evidence bag. It contained a folded note. Nobody had seen it before. Officer Mercer frowned. Rebecca Klein stepped closer. Lorraine Bianchi leaned forward. Even Caprio, when he returned, looked genuinely surprised. The note, Sal explained, had been found that morning by a court officer inside one of the evidence photo envelopes. It had been stuck to the back of a printed scene photograph, likely overlooked during scanning. Officer Mercer confirmed it had originally been recovered at the scene near the toppled flower cart, but had not been considered material because it was soaked and partly illegible at the time. It had since dried enough to read. Caprio opened it carefully. The handwriting was messy, rushed, pressed so hard the pen had almost torn the paper. "I'm sorry, I can't stay. My sister can't breathe. I swear I'll come back. Please tell the lady I'm sorry." The room erupted in whispers. Lorraine Bianchi covered her mouth. Matteo looked stunned, not guilty stunned, almost embarrassed, like the note belonged to a version of him he had spent weeks trying to bury. Caprio held the paper up. "Did you write this?" A long pause, then the smallest nod. "Did you leave this at the scene?" "Yes." "Why was this not mentioned before?" Officer Mercer admitted that, on the wet morning in question, the paper had been half buried under spilled potting soil and petals. It was collected with debris, but not connected to the juvenile until later evidence review. The prosecutor looked frustrated, not because it exonerated Matteo, but because it complicated the moral clarity of the case. And just like that, another twist. He had not left nothing behind. He had left words. A real apology, a promise to return. He still ran. He still lied later. But in the first chaotic seconds after the crash, before fear had hardened into attitude, he had shown remorse. This was why everybody stayed locked in. Every time you thought you knew which lane the story was in, it swerved. Caprio read the note again, slower. Then he looked at Matteo. "Why didn't you tell anyone about this?" "Because it didn't matter after I didn't come back." That line hit almost as hard as the note. Because it told the court exactly how shame works in young people. Once they fail one promise, they decide truth is pointless. Once they become the villain in their own head, they act the part. Anthony DeLuca spoke up unexpectedly from the gallery. "Judge, I'm not trying to be cold, but I still lost work. My boss still had to cover the route. I got a teenager at home too. If he did this, I'd drag him in myself." Caprio nodded. "You are not wrong." Then Lorraine Bianchi, still holding her wrist, asked if she could see the note. The bailiff brought it to her. Her fingers trembled as she read. For several seconds she said nothing. Then she looked at Matteo with eyes that had changed completely. "I never saw this," she said. "All I saw was tail lights." Matteo whispered, "I know." The judge could have ended the hearing there with a measured penalty and a moral speech. Most courts probably would, but he didn't, because he sensed what every great storyteller senses. The center of the matter had not yet been touched. The truth existed. The evidence existed. The harm existed. The apology existed. But the transformation had not happened, not fully. Mateo had still not stood in the truth long enough to own it out loud. And until he did, the room would keep waiting. Share this with someone who believes real justice is not just punishment, because the next 10 minutes were the difference between a sentence and a turning point. Caprio asked Mateo to step away from the table and stand alone in front of the bench. No mother at his side, no counselor, no folder, no hiding behind adults or paperwork, just the boy and the consequences. Mateo walked forward stiffly. His sneakers squeaked once against the polished floor. You could hear a heating vent hum somewhere in the back. Sophia watched him like he was crossing a tightrope over something none of them could see. "Look at Mrs. Bianchi," Caprio said. Mateo did. "Now look at Mr. De Luca." He did. "Now look at your mother." That one took longer. Elena was crying openly now, but there was no anger in her face anymore. Only grief. The kind that comes when your child has been in danger for a long time and you only just realized how long. Caprio said, "Tell them the truth with no armor, no attitude, no shortcuts. If this is the moment you become a man of character, it will begin with a sentence you don't want to say." Everybody in the courtroom knew this was the turning point. The camera, if there had been one filming close enough, would have captured the exact second Mateo's mask started to break. Not dramatically, not movie style, just a slow collapse around the eyes. He took a breath. Another. His hands shook so badly he hid them behind his back and then brought them back out when he realized hiding was the same instinct that got him there. "I was scared," he said. Caprio waited. "I thought if I stopped, Sophia would get worse. And when I saw the flowers fall and Mrs. Bianchi go down, I knew I had done something bad. I knew it. But I kept thinking if I could just fix the medicine part first, maybe the other part would somehow not be real." He swallowed. The room did not move. "When the cop came later, I already knew I was the bad guy, so I acted like one." That sentence hit like a bell. Because it was true in a way adults understand and children live through. Shame had shaped behavior faster than guilt. Caprio asked, "Why the disrespect?" Mateo answered right away this time. "Because if I sounded scared, then everybody would know I was." Another shareable quote, brutal, honest. The judge nodded slowly. Fear often disguises itself as arrogance. It fools a lot of people. Then Caprio did something unexpected. He asked Sophia if she wanted to say anything. Elena started to object, but Sophia stood on her own before anyone could stop her. She was tiny beside the witness stand. Her cardigan sleeve had ridden up, revealing the soft purple bruise of a recent IV attempt near her elbow. Suddenly, all the legal language in the room had a heartbeat. "Did your brother leave because of you?" Caprio asked gently. Sophia's lower lip trembled. "He thought I was gonna stop breathing." "Were you?" "I don't know, I was scared too." Then she said the kind of thing that makes grown adults stare at the floor because it is too truthful to meet head-on. When Mateo gets scared, he gets mean first. A few quiet chuckles of heartbreak moved through the gallery. Even Mateo almost smiled, then couldn't. Sophia kept going, but he always comes back. Lorraine Bianchi started crying then, not loudly, just tears spilling down into the folds of her scarf. The judge thanked Sophia and asked her to sit. The room had turned, completely, not away from justice but toward something deeper than blame. And yet the most powerful part was still waiting. Because Caprio then pulled out the final document in the folder, a handwritten victim impact letter from Lorraine Bianchi, submitted before the hearing and not yet read aloud. The judge asked if she still wanted it considered. She nodded. He invited her to read it herself. Her voice was shaky at first. She wrote that the fall had embarrassed her almost more than it hurt, that for a second on the sidewalk she felt old in a way she had never allowed herself to feel, that she was angry for weeks. Angry at the pain, the ruined memorial flowers, the lost business, the idea of being left behind. But after learning more about the case and seeing the note, she spent sleepless nights thinking about what kind of child knows how to write an apology and still thinks honesty later won't matter. Then she looked directly at Mateo and said, "A child who has learned that mistakes do not lead to help. They lead to loss." There was no sound in the courtroom, except one person quietly sniffling in the second row. Lorraine continued, "What you did was wrong, deeply wrong. You hurt me. You scared me. But I do not want the rest of your life built on the worst 15 minutes of your childhood." That was the unexpected compassion moment, the mercy twist. And still, because this story kept refusing simplicity, she did not stop there. You will pay back every dollar you can. You will work if the judge orders it. You will stand in the place you almost ran from. And if you ever speak to an officer or to your mother with that ugly pride again, I will be far less kind the next time I see you. The courtroom laughed through tears. Even Judge Caprio smiled. Mateo stared at her like he had no language for what forgiveness feels like when you don't think you deserve it. Which is to say, he looked terrified. Caprio's voice lowered. "Young man, this woman is showing you something powerful. Do not insult it by wasting it." Then came the confrontation around the 6,000-word mark, the moment everything had been building toward. Judge Caprio asked Mateo the question no one else had asked cleanly enough. "What do you want mercy for?" At first Mateo looked confused. Caprio repeated it. "Not whether you want mercy. Why, what exactly are you asking this court to spare?" The question cut past emotion and straight into motive. Elena held her breath. Sophia stared. Officer Mercer leaned forward. Ms. Patel put her pen down. And that is when Mateo finally said the words people in that room would remember years later. He looked at the judge, then at his mother, then at the victims and said, "I'm not asking you to save me from consequences. I'm asking you not to make my mother pay for a decision I made while she was busy keeping old people alive all night and I was trying to keep my sister breathing in the morning. Put it on me. Every bit you can, but don't put it on them." There it was. The powerful line. No one interrupted, no one coughed, the room just absorbed it. Because that sentence did three things at once. It admitted fault, it refused self-pity, and it revealed the one thing Mateo had been protecting under all that arrogance, not himself, but the fragile little structure of his family. Judge Caprio's expression changed in a way people in the gallery would later talk about in the hallway. Not softened exactly, clarified, like he had finally located the center of the boy standing in front of him. Mateo kept talking, because once the truth starts coming out, it usually comes out all at once. "I know what I did to Mrs. Bianchi was wrong. I know Mr. DeLuca lost money because of me. I know I lied because I was ashamed and because I thought if I admitted it, everybody would look at my mom like she failed. But she didn't fail. She goes to work when she's tired. She buys my sister medicine before she buys herself shoes. She falls asleep sitting up because she works too much. I took that car. I hit those people. I said those words, me." Elena broke completely then, shoulders shaking. Mateo's own voice cracked. "If you want me to scrub sidewalks, I'll scrub them. If you want me to stack flowers, I'll stack them. If you want me to stand outside with a sign saying I was wrong, I'll do that too. But don't say my mother raised a criminal because she raised somebody who got scared and did something stupid trying to be useful." Nobody in that courtroom forgot the sentence that followed. "She raised somebody who still came here." That was the line, the one people would clip, the one millions would quote, the one that turns a hearing into something larger than a case. Caprio let the silence sit until it became part of the ruling. Then he asked, "Why didn't you come back to the scene like your note said?" Matteo closed his eyes. "Because by the time Sophia got the treatment and my mom woke up and saw the car, I knew there was no version of the story where I wasn't the person who left. And once you become that person in your own head, coming back feels fake." Caprio answered with a sentence that could have been carved into the bench itself. "Redemption begins the moment you return anyway." Another shareable quote, another turning point. If that line hit you, subscribe now, because what happened next proved mercy is only meaningful when it demands something real in return. The prosecutor, to her credit, didn't fight the emotional shift. She simply said the city wanted a consequence that matched both the harm and the potential for rehabilitation. She proposed structured community service tied directly to the victims, mandatory counseling, written apologies, and a payment plan for restitution adapted to the family's means. "The city's interest," she said, "is not in crushing a 13-year-old. It is in making sure this never happens again." Officer Mercer then asked to say one final thing. Caprio allowed it. Mercer looked at Matteo. "When I watched that body cam later, I was angry. Still am a little. But I've also been a cop long enough to know there's a difference between a kid who doesn't care and a kid who cares so much he gets stupid. Don't make me regret knowing the difference." Matteo nodded, "I won't." But just when the courtroom thought the emotional peak had been reached, another twist hit. The clerk received a message from the court officer outside. A man had arrived late asking to be heard briefly. Judge Caprio frowned, then allowed him in. It was Mr. Henry Lawson, the RIPTA bus driver from the route that passed Messer Street that morning. He wore a navy transit jacket and carried a folded cap in both hands. He had seen the newsboard listing and realized it was the same case. He asked permission to speak because he believed the court should know one more fact. At 6:52 a.m. before the crash, Henry Lawson had stopped his bus at the corner near the Cruz apartment. Matteo had waved him down, trying to board with Sophia in pajamas and no shoes, but Lawson had refused because the little girl was coughing violently, and he believed they needed an ambulance, not a bus. He had told the boy to call 911. Matteo had shouted that 911 takes forever. The whole room felt that old trauma click into place again. Lawson added that Matteo had looked more panicked than rude, and that after the bus pulled off, he watched the boy carry Sophia back up the apartment steps. This didn't erase anything new, but it confirmed the fear in real time from an independent witness. The story was now fully formed, a child trying adult solutions inside a child's panic. Judge Caprio thanked Lawson. Then he looked down at the file, the note, the letters, the receipts, the statements, and the faces, all of it, harm, context, fear, pride, honesty, forgiveness. "This," he said slowly, "is why judging is not arithmetic." Nobody forgot that line either. It would be easy to punish the conduct and miss the child. It would be easy to excuse the child and insult the victims. Justice requires that I do neither. Then came the ruling. Matteo would not be adjudicated in a way that branded him permanently if he complied fully. Instead, the court would structure what Judge Caprio called a mercy contract. 100 hours of community service over 6 months, 50 of them directly assisting Lorraine Bianchi at her flower stand after school and on Saturdays, supervised and documented. 25 hours assisting Federal Hill Bakery with unloading and cleanup, not driving, obviously, but labor that let him see the cost of interrupted work. Mandatory weekly counseling with a youth trauma therapist approved by the court. A written apology to each victim and to Officer Mercer. An essay for the school and court titled, "What Fear Told Me to Do, and What Truth Required Instead." Restitution of $200 personally earned by Matteo through approved work. Symbolic but meaningful, with the remaining balance addressed through the family's existing insurance, and a reduced civil settlement already being negotiated. And then the judge added the part nobody expected. "Every 30 days," he said, "you will return to this courtroom and report directly to me. Not because I don't trust you, because I want you to see what accountability looks like when someone refuses to give up on you." Matteo looked stunned. Elena looked relieved and overwhelmed at once. Sophia looked like she finally exhaled for the first time all morning. But Caprio wasn't done. He said, "There is one more thing, Matteo. You are forbidden from using pain as permission. Your father's death was a tragedy. Your family's hardship is real. Your fear for your sister was real. None of that gives you the right to endanger strangers or speak truth like it's optional. If you learn that lesson, this day may save you. If you don't, this day will just be a dramatic memory. Which will it be?" Matteo answered immediately. No shrug, no attitude. "The first one." Caprio nodded. "Good, because mercy means nothing if it costs you nothing." There was the final legal philosophical blow. Simple, clean, unforgettable. Then something happened that no one in the room had planned, and everyone later said was the real resolution. Lorraine Bianchi stood, walked slowly to Matteo, and held out one crushed white carnation she had brought from the remains of that morning's damaged memorial stock. It had browned a little at the edges but was still intact. "This was in the cart that day," she said. "Take it." Matteo stared at it. "Why?" "So you remember both things," she said. "What you broke and what didn't break." Even Judge Caprio looked away for a second then, giving the room dignity enough to feel what it was feeling. Like this video, if you believe the strongest moments in court are not always the loudest ones, because what happened after the sentence mattered even more than the sentence itself. Over the next 6 months, Matteo returned every 30 days exactly as ordered. The script of his life started changing in public, which is the hardest way to change because people can compare every version of you against the old one. On the first check-in, 31 days later, he walked into court wearing a plain navy sweatshirt, no hood up, no performance. He had logged 21 community service hours at Bianchi Blooms and 14 at Federal Hill Bakery. Lorraine reported he was awkward with customers, terrible at ribbon tying, and surprisingly good at sweeping soil without being asked. Anthony DeLuca said the boy worked hard, showed up on time, and once stayed an extra 40 minutes to clean flour from delivery trays after another employee called out. Judge Caprio asked him what he had learned. Matteo answered, "That grown-up problems don't look dramatic when you're the one cleaning them up. They just look heavy." Another line, another shift. At the second check-in, Ms. Patel reported improved school attendance and fewer disciplinary incidents. The trauma counselor, Dr. Lena Morales, submitted a progress note stating Matteo had begun identifying the sequence between panic and defiance. He had apparently said in session, "If I can name fear before it turns into attitude, I have a chance." That is not how 13-year-olds usually talk unless they have had to grow up too fast and are finally being taught how not to. At the third check-in, something almost unbelievable happened. Officer Mercer appeared again, not as a complaining witness this time, but as a voluntary observer. When asked why, he said, "I wanted to see whether the kid meant what he said." Then he added, with the kind of dry honesty only a cop can deliver, "He did." Matteo had also completed the essay Judge Caprio ordered. The court allowed portions to be read. In it he wrote, "The crash happened in seconds. The lie happened in a second too. But the reason I lied had been building for years. I thought being tough meant acting like nothing scared me. Now I know being trustworthy means saying what scared me before it makes decisions for me." People in the gallery that day clapped before realizing they were in a courtroom and probably shouldn't. Judge Caprio let it slide. 3 months after the original hearing, a local youth center invited Lorraine Bianchi and Matteo to speak together at an asthma awareness and safe decision seminar for middle school students. No one expected Lorraine to accept. She did. She stood beside the very kid who had knocked her to the pavement and told a room of 7th graders, A bad decision can reveal character, but so can what you do the morning after. Mateo spoke too. His knees shook, his voice caught, but he did it. He told them the truth about panic, about shame, about how quickly one reckless decision multiplies victims you never meant to create. "I thought there were only 2 people in the car that day," he said. "Turns out there were a lot more in the crash." That line made teachers wipe their eyes. And yet the story still had one final validation layer waiting. In April, almost 5 months after the incident, Judge Caprio received a letter at Chambers. Handwritten, blue ink, front addressed simply to the judge who saw me before I did. It was from Mateo. He wrote that Sophia had not been back to the emergency room in 3 months because Elena had gotten stable equipment through a hospital assistance program that Dr. Morales helped secure. He wrote that he now kept a list on the refrigerator titled "Who to Call Before You Panic," with 4 adult numbers and 2 neighbor contacts. He wrote that he still thought about the crash whenever he saw wet streets, and that he hoped he always would. He wrote that Lorraine had taught him how to strip thorns from rose stems without cutting himself, and how to apologize without making the other person comfort you. He wrote that Anthony DeLuca had let him help stack pastry boxes and once said, "If you can lift responsibility, you can lift bread trays." He wrote that Officer Mercer had shaken his hand after the 3rd check-in, which mattered more to him than he expected. And then came the line Judge Caprio later read aloud with visible emotion. "You told me redemption begins the moment you return anyway. I think I return a little every day now." That sentence completed the arc. Schadenfreude had turned to empathy. Empathy had turned to accountability. Accountability had turned to inspiration. Not because anything was erased, but because it was confronted honestly enough to become useful. Share this with someone raising a kid who acts tough when they're really scared, because stories like this don't go viral just because they're emotional. They spread because they tell the truth about people in a way punishment alone never can. At the final 6-month review, the courtroom was fuller than usual. Word had spread. Not internet spread inside the script, but community spread. Teachers, court staff, 2 bakery employees, a nurse from Alina's work. Even Mr. Lawson, the bus driver, came back and sat quietly in the 3rd row. Everybody wanted to see whether the transformation would hold when no one was forcing it. Mateo stood at the same spot where he once hid inside, shrugging silence. But he looked different, taller somehow, though maybe it was only posture. Hair trimmed, plain black hoodie, hands steady. He brought a folder not because someone told him to but because he had organized his own service logs, counseling summaries, school report, and a small envelope. Judge Caprio reviewed the file. Community service completed in full, with 12 extra hours volunteered at Bianchi Bloom's during Mother's Day week. Counseling attendance perfect. School absences reduced. No new incidents. Restitution paid. $200 from approved work, every bill recorded. The symbolic amount had become sacred to him because he earned it the slow way. "Do you have anything to say, Mateo?" the judge asked. This time the boy didn't hesitate. "Yes, Your Honor. I used to think consequences were the end of the story. Now I think they're the place where the real story starts if you let them." The room practically glowed with that line. He then handed the envelope to the bailiff. Inside was a photo. It showed a Saturday morning at Bianchi Bloom's. Lorraine smiling behind the flower stand. Sophia beside her holding a small chalkboard sign that read "Spring Arrangement Class Today." Mateo in the back, sweeping petals into a dustpan with Anthony DeLuca mock pointing at him like a foreman. It was ordinary, which is exactly why it was beautiful. Redemption is rarely cinematic while you're living it. It usually looks like showing up again and again, until trust stops flinching when you enter the room. Judge Caprio cleared his throat. "Mateo Cruz, the court finds you have complied fully and meaningfully. More importantly, you have understood. That is rarer than people think. This matter is closed with no further sanctions." Elena wept openly. Sophia clapped once before covering her mouth. The gallery laughed softly. Then Caprio added one last thing, leaning forward the way he did when he wanted the words to stay in someone's bones. Young man, never confuse being needed with being ready. Children should not have to rescue the adults around them. But when life forces you into hard places, remember this. Urgency is not permission, fear is not wisdom, and truth delayed is still truth owed. That might have been the most complete summary of the whole case. Mateo nodded, "Yes, sir." The judge smiled faintly. "And one more lesson. A courtroom can punish you. It can also reintroduce you to yourself. Don't make me have to do that again." People laughed, but they were crying too. After the hearing, Lorraine Bianchi embraced Elena. Anthony DeLuca slapped Mateo lightly on the shoulder and told him summer meant 5:00 a.m. bakery shifts if he wanted extra honest money. Officer Mercer shook hands with him, then bent down to Sophia and told her to keep carrying the inhaler and let adults drive the car from now on. Sophia, who had become bolder through all this, answered, "That's the plan." Months later, in late August, one more update arrived. Not to the court this time, but to the school counselor who had first cracked the case open with a letter. Mateo had been selected by his middle school principal to speak to incoming sixth graders about choices, pressure, and asking for help before panic takes over. Ms. Patel said he stood at the podium in the cafeteria wearing a clean white polo and trembling almost as much as he had in court, but he did not hide it. He opened with, "I used to think being brave meant handling everything alone. That is how I almost ruined 4 lives before first period." Those students, most of them 11 and 12, reportedly sat in total silence. When he finished, one boy asked, "Weren't you embarrassed?" Mateo answered, "Yeah, but embarrassment can shrink you or it can sharpen you. Depends what you do next." That is what made the story live beyond the hearing. Not just that a judge was wise, not just that a victim forgave, not just that a kid cried and said something powerful. It lived because the mercy given in that courtroom did not float away as sentiment. It turned into labor, return, repair, humility, repetition. The boring, difficult, glorious mechanics of actual change. And that is where competitor stories often stop too soon. They end at the tears. But real emotional payoff comes after the tears, when the person proves the moment wasn't performance. Mateo proved it in hours swept, trays lifted, letters written, counseling attended, and truths spoken before fear could translate them into arrogance. He proved it when nobody was clapping. He proved it when the audience was gone. In the end, the most powerful thing he said was not just the line about sparing his family from his consequence, though that line would be quoted everywhere. It was the deeper truth under all of it, that a child can do serious harm and still be reachable, that accountability can be structured in a way that protects victims and repairs character, and that mercy is not softness when it insists on work. There are people who believe justice looks strongest when it crushes. There are others who believe compassion means looking away. This courtroom showed something harder and better. Justice looked strongs. When it stared directly at the harm, refused to lie about it, and still asked whether the person responsible could become more than the worst thing they had done. Compassion looked strongest when it demanded repair instead of applause. Judge Caprio never treated Mateo like a monster. He never treated him like a baby either. He treated him like someone standing at a fork in the road. And maybe that is why the hearing mattered so much. Because all around the country, in homes and schools and streets and courtrooms, there are kids who look disrespectful before they look terrified. Kids who wear attitude like a helmet because fear feels too naked. Kids who need boundaries badly, but need to be seen just as badly. The challenge is knowing the difference between excusing them and reaching them. Mateo Cruz was 13, old enough to know better, yes, young enough to still become better, absolutely. That tension is where the whole story lived. And maybe the final lesson belongs to Lorraine Bianchi, standing there with a bruised hip, a braced wrist, and a crushed white carnation. What you broke, and what didn't break. That is the whole human condition in one sentence. We break trust, we break peace, we break each other's routines and hearts and assumptions. But sometimes, if truth arrives before it's too late, not everything breaks. Some things bend, some things bruise, some things wait for you to return anyway. If this story moved you, drop a comment telling us which line hit you the hardest. Put it on me. Redemption begins the moment you return anyway. Or what you broke and what didn't break. Like this video if you believe mercy should be earned, not assumed. Hit that subscribe button if you want more stories where justice and compassion collide in unforgettable ways. And share this with someone who needs to remember that one bad moment does not have to become a whole life. Because the next story we're covering might be even more unbelievable. A father walks into court ready to fight a fine, only to hear a witness he never knew existed speak three words that changed the entire case. You do not want to miss that one. And if there's one thought to leave with tonight, let it be this. The law can stop you, consequences can humble you, but only truth can remake you.